What's your too coincidental to be believed story that actually happened to you? Story 1. One time my mum and I booked separately holidays, her with her friend and me with mine. It's worth mentioning, neither of us knew we were even looking to book the holiday. We ended up on the same flight to the same country, caught the same transfer, and our hotels were literally 5 minutes apart. Oh, and we both got a bargain. Story 2. I was standing in a long line at my CVS in Virginia. The woman behind me remarked on how crowded the store was, and we started talking. She had moved to Virginia from Tennessee. I said, oh no kidding, me too. I came from Tennessee last year. What town? The same town I came from. What neighborhood? Same neighborhood. What street? Same street. I said my address was 3384. She goes, that was my house. Shed sold it years before to the family we bought it from. Story 3. A not so happy story with a good ending. When I was 19, my boyfriend of a year had slapped me across the face, which left me shaken and confused. I called for a taxi to take me back to my mother's house, the home I had left because of her abusive husband, my stepfather. My boyfriend tried to stop me leaving, which caused a scene as I was hopping into the taxi, which led to the driver asking me what it was all about. I proceeded to tell him about how my boyfriend and I were deeply in love, but that he was very jealous and didn't trust me, and ultimately things had led up to him being violent with me for the first time that evening. The taxi driver became very serious and told me that I had to leave the relationship. He was really adamant about it. At that point we had just arrived at my mother's house, and I will never forget the look he gave me as he turned around and said to me, I have driven your mother home here before. We live in a big city, so this was a very big coincidence. My mother never catches taxis, and I knew it must have happened one time when she was out with her abusive husband and he had turned nasty, leaving her with no other way to get home. It made me realize I had fallen into the same pattern of relationship that my mother was in, which woke me up and gave me the courage and strength to end it. Eventually my mother also left her husband. Many years later she and I are now both in happy relationships with much kinder men, and the cycle is thankfully broken. Story 4 months before my now wife of 23 years and I started dating, I bought a concert ticket with a bunch of my friends for a show that was coming to my hometown. About 2 weeks before the show my wife and I met and started dating. She decided she would go to the show also and bought an extra ticket from one of her friends. Someone I didn't know at all. We pre-gamed for a while before the show, and by the time we got into the venue we were feeling pretty okay. She and I never once looked at our tickets, not even when we showed them to get in. Paper ticks back in those days. Once we got in and wandered around for a bit, we decided we would go to the spot of whoever had the best seat. Pulled out the tickets to see where to head, and we had seats right next to each other. We've never looked back. Story 5. My friend once had a coworker hand her a 25-year-old photo with an inscription on the back stating the names and ages of the children depicted. The coworker asked her, is this you and your sister? When she stated that yes, it was, the coworker told her she had found it inside a book she purchased from a secondhand store. Apparently, my friend's mum had been using the photo as a bookmark many years ago. She had lost the book on an interstate bus trip. We have no idea where it was in the intervening 25 years. Story 6. Back in 2001, our school was on a class trip to Washington, D.C. We were between tour times and 5-ish of us were just kind of looping around the mall past the Capitol building. This was back when you could just, be there because nothing had happened yet, but I digress. Anyway, saw a guy near the reflecting pool with some folks in suits following him. He was in a wheelchair, looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. Suddenly, the wheelchair unfolded and stood up on 2 wheels. This was Dean Kamen, inventor, founder of the first robotics competition, and a couple of us in our group had founded a robotics team 2 years before to compete in that competition. We wandered over and introduced ourselves, said thank you, that we were big fans, asked for his autograph, nerd stuff. Cut to years later. I'm long graduated and volunteering for the program. I run into him at one of the regional competition events where he's visiting and kind of offhandedly mention we met him in DC the one time. He looks at me and goes, that was you. So it turns out we accidentally ruined his day a little, not that he held it against us. The folks in suits were interviewing him for a news spot, and we sort of broke the flow. They 100 convinced themselves we were plants that Dean had arranged to show up, and he had a huge ego problem. It apparently changed the timbre of the rest of the day. Worth it though. Story 7. I once randomly sat next to a stranger on a plane who turned out to be my old neighbor from childhood. I only recognized him because he had the same weird laugh he did as a kid. Story 8. We were thinking about getting a second dog, something in the 35 pounds range. We already have a large chocolate lab. She needed a playmate and she loves smaller dogs. Lab is to the backyard one day, barking up a storm, that she never does, go out there, and there's a deathly skinny little terrier mix against the sound wall. She's doing a lot better now, topped out around 42 pounds L. Story 9. My best friend and I both met women separately around the same time and started dating them. We decided to get together for a double date, and the 2 women were also best friends who worked together. None of us knew. We both got married, then the 2 women had a falling out and we don't see each other much anymore. A few really fun years though. Story 10. Back in the summer of 2010, I lived in a tent in the backyard of an amazing lady named Gretchen. Long story. She had a trampoline, an apple tree, ripe tomatoes growing on vines, and fresh blackberries right off the bush, and there was a long line of lavender shrubs lining the long driveway. It was the best summer of my youth. This was in northern Washington state, near the Canadian border. I moved away that winter and we fell out of touch. 4 or 5 years later I had moved and traveled extensively, and I ended up meeting my so and was living in Central Florida. over 3,000 miles away. I was working at a coffee shop and a woman came in while I was mopping and I stopped and did a double take because she looked so similar to Gretchen. I heard her give her name and it wasn't my old friend. After a moment though, I just couldn't get over how uncanny it was, so I blurted out, "I'm sorry, but you look just like an old friend of mine." But her name was Gretchen and she lived in Washington. The lady blinked at me and said, "Well, I have a sister named Gretchen who lives in Washington." It was bananas. She called her sister and it was my old buddy. We hadn't spoken in years, but a few months later Gretchen flew out to visit her sister, who was living not too far away from me, and they both came around for a visit. That was one of 3 greatest coincidences of my life. Story 11. I live in Chicago. I was attending a festival in New York. On the last day of the festival, I was walking with a newly made friend single file down a narrow pathway in the middle of the forest. She asked me where I lived in Chicago. Someone was walking towards us on the path dragging a cooler on wheels, and because the path was so narrow we turned to face each other and sort of sidestepped to get past, and as I was face to face with this person coming the other way, I answered my friend telling her the cross streets closest to where I live in Chicago. The person dragging the cooler stops and says, "And, in what city?" I said Chicago, and the cooler dragging stranger said, "I live on and in Chicago," and that's how I met my next door neighbor. Story 12. In the late 1980s my dad went to see the ska band The English Beat. My dad was in the front row, and at the end of the concert, the lead singer leaned down from the stage and told my dad he liked his hair. In 2009 I went to see The English Beat, and at the end of the concert the lead singer leaned down from the stage and told me he liked my hair. Weird coincidence or thing? This guy does it every show. Story 13. Really low point. Loneliness was weighing heavy. Was missing my brother who'd passed away some time prior. I asked the universe of it really was listening to show some kind of kindness in reflection to how I was feeling. Few minutes later, literally, a stranger approached me and inquired about me. Brother, I look like my brother, so they had asked used to telling the story of my brother who had died. I told it once again and received a huge watho. My brother would hug someone from this passerby. I knew then, the world is a strange place. Story 14. Was waiting at the airport for our flight to Orlando. 3 other people from work showed up with their spouses. All of us on the same flight. I did not want to get on the plane, because that's the kind of stuff news stations love to talk about when planes go down. Story 15. I'm a bus driver. Part of my route took me through a mall one day, while on a 2-lane road that was about to merge. A car tried to beat me to it, sideswiped me, blamed me, but he was held at fault. A year later, I was hit again by someone making a right turn from the left lane. Not only did it happen at the same spot as the previous accident, but one of the cops who showed up was the same one who came to the first one. Story 16. I went to see the Rolling Stones at a huge stadium in the 90s. We were in a great state of mind and got there just as they started with Start Me Up. We went forward and no one ever checked our tickets. Not once. We went down to the floor level. Still no one looked at our tickets, including us. We had no idea where our seats were. We finally got within about 12 rows of the very front of the stage and saw 2 open seats and took them. No one ever looked at our tickets. About halfway through the concert we decided to see where our real seats were. We showed an usher and he took us back for the same seats. We found our seats at a 40,000 seat venue by luck. Story 17. When managing a hotel, a couple came from Tennessee came through. As I checked them and they told me they were driving across Canada. The man looked at my name tag, said Menacing Gummy, is that a popular last name in Canada? I said that it wasn't at all, fairly uncommon in fact. He looked confused, told me that a few days before they went to a tourist information booth 3 provinces over, the lady that helped them had the same last name as me. Knowing that it would only serve to perpetuate the idea that many Americans have that all Canadians know that guy Steve they met on holidays once, I had to explain that woman was my aunt. Story 18. I live in PA and have gone to DC 5 times in my life, and every time I have ran into someone I knew on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. It's a family joke now. Story 19. I grew up and went to summer camp in northern Minnesota. In my 40s, I moved to Australia. My wife and I were vacationing in New Zealand and decided to rent a car and drive into the middle of nowhere, stopping along the way to take photos of the scenery. We pulled into a lookout in a remote area, just large enough for 4 or 5 cars at most. We hadn't seen a car in the last hour or so, but as we were getting out another car pulled in. The driver was wearing a shirt with the name of my old summer camp on it. I struck up a conversation and it turns out he attended, but was a few years younger than me, so we didn't really know each other. We started naming people a couple years younger than me who were a couple years older than him, and one of the people we both remembered was your typical, extroverted class clown. As we were laughing at some of that kid's antics, another car pulled up and a third couple joined us at the lookout. The guy overheard us mention the name of the camp clown and said, "That's my name, and I used to go there," pointing at the shirt. It was him, from a tiny summer camp in Minnesota. 3 people on the other side of the planet happened to all stop at the same place at the same time in the middle of absolutely nowhere. If it happened in a movie, I'd never believe it. Story 20. When I was 17, on a whim I went camping about 150 miles from home in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of friends. My parents basically said, "Call us at this time every day you're gone so we hear from you." The only phone was 17 miles from the campsite, and on the second night there I forgot until about 20 minutes before I was supposed to call, got into Dad's Blazer and went tearing down the mountain to get to the one payphone within like 50 miles. I pull up, and there's this woman talking on the phone, yak 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 yak. Talking about nothing while I'm sweating bullets, and I kept getting madder and madder about it. Nearly 45 minutes later she finally hangs up, and as she was walking away I made some nasty comment to her. She flipped me off, gave me a hearty, you, and I didn't see her again. 2 years later, I'm at university, a good 4-hour drive from both where my parents lived and everywhere else I had been, and one of my best friends that winter had a new girlfriend. She and I hit it off immediately. We were insta-best friends. Met her for coffee one morning and we were laughing about something, and I finally said, you know, I have this nagging feeling I know you from somewhere. She said the same thing and it had been bugging her too, so we started exchanging notes. We realized it at the same time. Me, you were that on the phone, and her, you were that little in the blue Chevy. Had a good laugh about it. She said, man, you ruined my whole night with that. I went back home and had a bunch of beers and complained about you to anybody that would listen. An hour before our school's open house last year, someone knocked at my classroom door. Usually I would not answer because I guard my time. That night, I decided to open it and found a man I didn't know. He introduced himself as the father of one of my new students, and he wanted to stop by to see if he could catch me since he couldn't meet during the official hours. After speaking with him a few minutes, I noticed the college name on his shirt, a very small college 4 hours away that I happened to attend over 30 years ago. I remarked on it, and he said he attended there as well. Come to find out, we were there the same 2 years, lived at opposite ends of the same dorm, and worked at the same hotel. Story 21. A few years retired as a South Bronx elementary school teacher after 32-year career. In the early 2000s my girlfriend and I were on a trip to the Galapagos Islands. When we landed on the island I heard my name being called out. It was one of my least favorite students about 10 years before. Literally at the far end of nowhere, I ran into a former student. 6 years ago I was called for jury duty, and I had to tell the judge that I could not serve on a particular case because the defendant was the brother of the student I met in the Galapagos. Story 22. Not really so remarkable, but it still left me shook. A few years ago, I had an early morning dream about a friend, former colleague that I hadn't seen or spoken to in 7 or 8 years. That very same day, he called me out of the blue to check in and catch up. Story 23. Wife and I were in line to enter the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, and the people in line behind us knew my dad. Were from California, and I noticed the guidebook they were reading had Marin County Library printed on the side. My dad had worked in Novato for years, though we lived 90 minutes from there. Got to talking, and they actually worked for the same company my dad did and knew him. Story 24. A silly one, but I bought my daughter one of those 100 words toys. She actually has several. The first one I bought her randomly broke one day. My godsister called me to tell me she wanted to send her a gift. I didn't ask what it was. A few days later, it shows up and it's the 100 words toy that broke just a few days earlier. No one knew the toy was broken because why would I mention to anyone? Story 25. Oh, I've had a couple of those. Once I was taking a flight back from Madrid to my country. I was sitting close to my gate and some dude sat next to me, waiting for the same flight. Didn't recognize him at first. Went into the plane and he was on the seat next to mine. Noticed him staring at me like I think I know who you are. Yeah, sure did. It was a childhood friend I hadn't seen in 12 years that moved to another state when we were kids pre-social media. Didn't even remember he existed. Number 2, I lived in Canada for a year when I was in high school. Met a lot of people and this girl in particular. Mary became my friend, we hung out and stuff, but that was it. Went back home, she went back to hers. Didn't exchange numbers, social media, or anything of that sort. 9 years later, I was living in New York, went with a couple of friends to watch a baseball game. We took the metro. First car was packed, so we let that one go and waited for the other one to arrive. When it did, the doors opened right in front of me with Mary standing right in front of me. We had zero contact. Turns out she was living there too. That was a weird one. Another example, I usually take several flights a year that I have to take a plane from my city, to another hub, then to the final city. I have come across the same friend at least 5 times at the hub airport. Never told him I was going to travel that day. Don't really talk much, but he's always there. It's very weird. We don't even live in the same city and we're never going to the same place. There's more. I think the Matrix is with me sometimes. Story 26. My husband and my father both had work trips to the same major city and ended up booking hotel rooms at the same hotel. They ran into each other in the hallway. Story 27. I have one more. I was working for a cleaning company and drove out of town an hour for a first-time clean. We are given a binder with the address and the layout of the home, info about pets, what people will be there, special notes about each room, etc. My first time there, I pull into using this as an example. 555 Fair Avenue. I unload my things, approached the side door and rang the doorbell. The note said that their adult son would be home, but if he didn't answer the door was unlocked and I may enter. There were notes about a dog named Sunny whom was friendly. Specified instructions said to start in the art room with a piano to the left of the kitchen. Sunny came out to greet me. I located the room with the exact description and started. 2 minutes and a young adult man said hello. Can I help you? It was the wrong house. Dog's name was Sunny. Everything else matched, but the actual house was the next street to my right, on Fair Crescent. Story 28. After my mom died, I couldn't bear parting with her sewing machine, even though mine was better. I tried to convince her for years to upgrade her machine, but she'd always put it off. Don't put things off. Mom was only 63 when she passed. After about 5 or so years, I thought it was time to let it go, but I wanted to give it to someone who needed it. I posted it, and the first reply I got was from a woman who had the same machine and loved it, but hers had stopped working long before. I was happy to give it to her, but she lived about 3 hours away. Oddly, my dad was going to the area with his newish wife who is lovely, even if she's not my mom, to visit her mom, and he said he'd take it. He dropped the machine off and all was well. A few months later, he called me and was just beside himself. His wife's mom had entered hospice, and when the nurse caring for her entered the room, they were all stunned to see that it was the sewing machine recipient. They apparently all got a little emotional. My mom was also a nurse, and I like to think she set it up. Story 29. I believed in karma since I was a kid, but one day I was feeling low and started questioning whether karma was real or not. I parked my car to go to college and silently asked the universe to show me a sign if karma truly existed. 5 minutes later, I saw a huge graffiti on a wall with the word karma written in bold letters. Story 30. I work at a medical examiner and was working with a new employee who was doing part-time work at a local funeral home. She saw my last name for the first time and was like, "Oh wow, we just got a guy at the funeral home with that last name." It's not a common name, so I was like, "What's the first name?" And it was my dad's name, even with the same initial for the middle name. It wasn't my dad, but there was like 10 minutes there where I thought my dad died. Story 31. My brother and sister-in-law ran into our childhood neighbors at an airport in Iceland. We're from the US, incidentally. Neither of them were visiting Iceland. They both had connecting flights from other places in Europe. Story 32. I am adopted and grew up without knowing any of my biological family, or anything about them. I loved animals as a child. It grew into a complete fascination with parrots as I became a young adult. Total hyperfixation for a while. Learned everything I possibly could. I had a pair of cockatoos and was the resident crazy lady in my friend's circle. I always thought it was just a completely random thing. I liked parrots so much. I got the opportunity to meet my biological grandfather on my bio mom's side when I was 22. Turns out, he was the town's resident parrot guy the whole time my biological mom was growing up. He had a pair of cockatoos he was absolutely in love with along with a few other birds. It blew me away. My whole life I knew nothing about these people and grew up nowhere near them with completely unrelated influences, and still I was just like him, with something so totally seemingly random too. Story 33. A few years ago my daughter had a 2003 bright orange. They only made 6,000 in this color Volkswagen Beetle with a sunroof and eyelash headlights. My new partner had the exact same car, not at the same time though. Story 34. I dropped out of college halfway through freshman year and ended up in an abusive relationship with an. We rented a shitty little motel room month to month and I worked at a local place answering phones. When I met my birth mother years later, she told me about how she'd dropped out of college before she got pregnant with me, and while she was pregnant she and my birth dad rented the exact same room at the motel, and she answered phones at the same place as me. Like, our lives lined up exactly at those ages. It's always blown my mind. Story 35. My grandparents split up because my grandfather was a raging abusive alcoholic. My grandma took my mum to live in a cult, under the guise of it being a spiritual commune. My grandfather then dated a lady who had 2 young daughters. After they broke up, one of the lady's daughters was sad and Una lived in her bed. Strangely enough, this is when my grandfather got sober. They never found the killer. As a child I was groomed and sad by him. Couple decades later, I was contacted by the police asking if I had any living male relatives who shared his DNA for a cold case. Naturally this sent me into a spiral. Then the very next week my daughter started work on the set of a TV show of a cold case. Guess which one? Story 36. Not me, but my grandmothers grew up in the same neighborhood in Texas. Yes, never knew each other. My dad was a music student and went away to music school in Michigan. Then my parents actually met in College in North Carolina. Story 37. My sister and I went to the same college. We will call us A and B. Our senior year they were building a new dorm. On one of the steel beams that was part of the construction a couple of stories up had graffiti writing that read High A, High B. Story 38. I randomly bumped into a girl that I grew up with while visiting NYC. Granted, I only lived an hour outside of the city in college. But what are the chances to bump into someone you know in a city with over 8 million people? That same day I again bumped into Molly Ringwald. Thus ends my random NYC bumps bows dash. Story 39. A pigeon landed on my face once for a few seconds, flapped its wings a bunch then flew away. It hurt, it was loud, it was scary. I told my mom as I was walking to meet her and she didn't believe me, and never did. Story 40. Was stationed in Alaska, won a trip to Japan, ran into a high school friend who was on RR from Vietnam. He was coming out of the barracks showers I was going in, never saw him again. Story 41. Several times I've had dreams that seem normal, only thing is that something would happen in that dream that normally wouldn't happen in real life. Although these things are not statistically unlikely, it's just that there's no reason for it to actually happen. There is always this feeling that it wasn't just a dream. For example, I had a dream that I was at work and my ex came in. I hadn't thought about her in a long time, and hadn't seen her in years. When we were together she never liked that place. And sure enough, not a week later, she came in, never seen her there before or after that. Story 42. Flying from Australia to the US and sat next to a guy who was going on a 2-week trip. I was moving there. 5 months later I booked a flight to come home. Guess who was sitting next to me? Same guy. Turns out had gone home and saved for a few months and went back to the US for another holiday. Story 43. Back in 2021, I had been begging my partner to let me get a kitten. For literally months I had been sending him postings on local shelter and rescue websites of adorable kittens. So, come my birthday, we are enjoying our cheesecake factory we had DoorDashed. Suddenly I get a flurry of snaps and a phone call from our roommate at the time. She and her mom had found a kitten in her mom's backyard. Roommate's partner, who was also our roommate, said no to them keeping it. Roommate had estimated this kitten was about 4 to 5 weeks old, too young to be away from mama. So I look at my partner and am like, well, we can foster him until he's old enough to rehome. Anyways, that kitten is going to be 4 in August and he's my son. We joke I manifested too hard. Oh, also, 2 days later roommate's mom found another kitten that we assumed to be my kitten sibling, so my roommate ended up with a kitten after all LMAO. Story 44. I just had a baby on April 10th. She was 3 months early and it's been really stressful. I was looking at my old journal entries, and on April 10th of last year was the day I miscarried my first pregnancy. What are the odds? Story 45. Not really a story but some odd coincidences with my husband and I. My fave number has always been 19, which has always been his hockey jersey number throughout his playing days. His name is Mike, my dad's name is Mike, my SIL's first name is the short version of one of my sister's names and her middle name is my first name. We both have scars on the same spot on our chins from completely different injuries. My mom's first name is my MIL's middle name. We grew up 15 minutes from each other, but never met until we were done college and working in near a big city. Story 46. Backstory. My wife and I run an online Bible study linked to a church in NYC, but we live in France. Of course, none of the Americans really have much of a comprehension of where we are in France, in the same way as where they are in New York does not really mean much to us because we have not been there. A lady from that group, but had not been able to join for a few months, was in Paris on business. She had a day off, saw an ad for the major attraction in the metro and decided to go and see it. She got on a TGV and got off at the nearest stop assuming she could get an Uber. Newsflash: when you are in a little market town in the middle of nowhere, even by French countryside standards, there are no Ubers. Realizing there was no way she could get to there and back in time for her return TGV, she decided to join the Bible study from a CAF. She didn't mention was in France because she was feeling a little silly. At some point we heard Bon Appetit in the background and asked where she was. It turned out she was less than 10 minutes from our house. We were able to spend an afternoon with her and she got meet my MIL just before she died. I should also add that this sort of disorganization is massively out of character for this lady. She is a successful businesswoman, CFO of a large restaurant chain. Everything about that day was nuts. Story 47. I get small calcium buildup spots on my skin sometimes. They are very small white pimple-looking things that happens on the edges of my facial orifices, barely noticeable and rare, but I got one on the inner bottom eyelid, right where my tear duct is. I ignored it for a while and didn't care, but it got big enough where I noticed it normally and it bothered me. I told my mom about it and she said she would help me get rid of it using a sewing needle and warm compress the next time I was due to see her. The night we decided this, I was trying to sleep. My cat jumped on my bed and walked over my face, and her one nail actually caught the tiny little white thing in the corner of my eye, and popped it. It didn't hurt at all. I had no scratch nor scar, it was just gone. Story 48. Another one was when a few families, including mine, hosted some exchange students from Europe. We live in City M. There were also exchange students staying in City T 1,500 miles away. Someone organized a trip to City D to go to a touristy place, so we all went. We're going about our day in City D and we hear someone calling one of the exchange students' names. Turns out it's his brother who was staying in City T. The host family flew to visit their family in here City D and took the student to the tourist place. I don't know what the chances of two brothers who are staying 1,500 miles away have host families who each decided to go visit the same attraction in the same city that neither of them are living in, but they're pretty low. Story 49. I signed a lease for an apartment. Later, I went into work. I worked overnight, picked up a newspaper in the break room before my shift started, read my horoscope which said change of residence is highlighted. Story 50. I was in Ontario to visit my hometown. I was living in BC. I ran into a friend I met in BC at Toronto airport going back, not knowing they'd gone to their hometown in Ontario as well. This happened twice, with two different friends, and one was even on my flight. Story 51. I live in the US but I was in Germany for a music festival. My travel companion, also an American, and I were not enjoying the festival because of a freak heat wave, so we decided to go see a friend in Prague. A series of mishaps: missed trains, slow trains instead of the fast trains, and a broken down train pushed our travel out quite a bit. In Dresden, we had a few hours layover due to the delays. A kind stranger told us how to get to the main square to kill some time. Because of the heat wave, lots of people came to the fountain square to play in the water and cool off. While we walked around, we were approached by a local woman who complimented our clothes. We were wearing brocade corsets. We chatted a bit, and it somehow came out that she and my companion had studied under the same dance teacher. I was like, what are the odds we were only here because of all the train issues and heat, etc. Story 52. I was in the military stationed at FT Sam Houston, which is a training post. The coincidence happened 3 different ways. I'm showing a pal photos from home. One was of a man named Tom Gagnon, a coworker who I had later learned lived in my apartment complex. That had already been crazy for me, since our workplace was in Phoenix, about 10 miles away from where we lived in Mesa, Arizona. But that coincidence was then, and this was now. While I'm flipping through the photos I brought from home, when I passed the one of him in the apartment swimming pool, I mentioned his name. She said, oh wow, I dated a guy named Gagnon for a couple years back in Rhode Island. We were in Phoenix, but I knew he was from Rhode Island, so of course I had to ask her old boyfriend's name and call my friend to see if they were related. Indeed they were. He was the father of her former beau. The final stage of the coincidence, though, came a few years ago, when I got my DNA testing done and discovered that his surname is featured very prominently in my DNA matches. I haven't located a direct link to someone with his first name, but I won't be surprised if it happens.